So Ian, welcome to the Mansion House, and it's great to have you here. We're here in the middle of the square mile.
Not my natural habitat, but thank you for inviting me into your natural habitat.
Very good. Well, and we see ourselves very much as the green finance centre of the world, and we've got COP26 coming up. And one of the things I feel very strongly about is finance and biodiversity should be going hand in hand. And I'm just interested to hear your views on that and how you feel finance can help really on an area where you're the expert rather than where I'm the expert.
Well, finance for conservation, sadly at the moment, largely depends on philanthropy. But as far as I'm aware, if you go to university now and study economics, you're still taught that nature is an externality. That we clever humans have created the economy and nature somewhere over there, rather than being the foundation for our economy, and everything we eat or drink or even our breathing depends on nature. But what we have to do in the medium term is to get conservation finance out of the philanthropic sector. There'll still be a need for that, but it needs to be built into the economy, so that every time you buy something, a bit of what you pay for it is paying for the protection of the ecosystem that produces it or that sustains us. So the UN conventions, each convention has its COP, its Conference of the Parties, and because the climate talks were deemed so urgent, they've been having them every year, which is why we're up to COP26, whereas the COP that fewer people are talking about is a few weeks before the climate COP26, which is COP15 of the Convention on Biodiversity. And China is the host of that. And I know that the UK and China have been in deep talks to try and get some sort of a combined output from these two conferences, simply because you cannot solve the climate crisis without solving the biodiversity crisis. And that is an equally existential crisis facing humankind and many of the other species on the planet, 1 million at the last estimate.
So to the lay person, tell us more why the world you work in is so critical to climate change.
Well, we think of biodiversity, and it's a horrible word. We're talking about nature. Let's stick to nature.
That's better. I like
and in UN speak, we're talking about nature-based solutions. We're talking about nature.
Yeah.
And nature is our life support system.
It is.
So I think what the financial sector and the consumers of the world have to understand is that when they buy the cheapest thing they can, and often economic circumstances require that, I quite understand that, you're actually borrowing from the future, because the true cost will be paid by the next generation or the one after that. And we have to start operating within our means. We have more and more people, each person aspiring to a better standard of living, which is entirely understandable, and again, I wouldn't begrudge anyone wanting to improve their own circumstances. But I work a lot in Africa, especially in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And around the turn of the millennium, there was a huge demand for tantalum. Tantalum is a heavy metal.
Yeah.
If you did chemistry at school, you might have heard of it. So the rising demand for tantalum capacitors was driven by the production of games consoles and mobile phones and laptops, all of which we use. But those technologies require raw materials. And at that time, I did an investigation for the guerrilla organization and the Born Free Foundation on the source. The ore is called Colombo tantalite, coltan. And coltan is like a gold rush in the Eastern DRC, because foreigners with briefcases full of dollars would come in and buy bags of rocks. It had to be the heavy rocks. So you can imagine if you're at home in the garden and you're digging your garden and somebody says, oh, you see those heavy rocks? There's a bloke over there who'll give you good money for that. Yeah. You know, silly money.
And it comes back to that point which we're making, is that you've got to go to the source, because I have no idea what damage my phone is.
No, and neither do I. Yes. I'm a conservationist.
Yeah.
And yet I cannot say, hand on heart, that my phone does not have tantalum from the DRC. And in fact, I don't want it to not have tantalum. I want the industries to invest in the DRC, so that instead of, and I took an Australian news crew there a few years ago, and we went down a mine, and there's kids with a couple of a flashlight tied to their head, with a lump hammer in one hand and a chisel in the other, hammering away in virtual darkness, and they're mining so that kids on the other side of the world can play computer games, and yet they're not part of that modern world. We want to bring them in and give them the proper tools, a decent education, and all right, some of the teenagers just working in school holidays. I used a lump hammer and chisel working for a builder when I was a teenager. I don't begrudge them that, but kids being forced to work underground, people with guns controlling the mines, which is happening in parts of the DRC, that is what we are funding when we buy carelessly. And right now, people are focused on climate change as one of the existential crises that's facing us, and a lot of people are looking for technical solutions, for which we need raw materials and energy. So, what's the new sort of gold rush in the DRC? Cobalt.
Yeah.
We need cobalt for batteries.
That's right.
And most of the world's cobalt is in the DRC.
You know better than me, the DRC is quite a political hotbed.
It is a wonderful country,
Beautiful country.
full of people who will welcome you with open arms, but it's a very different culture, and it's difficult to do business there. And none of the industries, these are the telecommunications industries, the entertainment
mining.
industries, the biggest, most profitable industries in the world have not invested.
But the positive thing is that because there is this pressure, and a lot of the big mining companies are now under pressure from their shareholders, they're starting to rethink what
Yes.
they're doing, and that's the positive. And the other thing, I mean, I was fortunate enough to go and see the gorillas in Virunga Park in Uganda, and what an experience. The gorillas, how they play in this climate world that we're trying to change.
Well, it's 45 years this year since I first went to Africa to work with Diane Fossey, studying the mountain gorillas, and it's been a big part of my life. The reason that mountain gorillas turned the corner and stopped heading towards extinction at the end of the last century and are now increasing in numbers is because of the tourism. It is an extraordinary experience.
It is.
The thing that worries me a little is that it kind of gives the impression that if an animal can't be visited by a tourist, it has no value. And we need to recognise that gorillas, whether or not they're visited by tourists, and elephants, and all the other species that are on a safari holiday checklist, have a role to play in the ecology of Africa. And that we, in the UK, in Europe, in North America, in Asia, depend on the ecosystem services provided by the Congo Basin rainforests. Gorillas and elephants in particular are very important as seed dispersal agents. So we're talking now about the positive power of poo, because elephants and gorillas like to eat fruit, the seeds go into their guts, churn around for a day or two, and come out the other end in a nice packet of manure, well, dung, which will compost down into manure, and miles from the parent plant. Every day they're consuming and dispersing thousands of seeds. Most of them don't get to be rainforest giants. They get eaten. And this is something that's only just been fully understood. An Italian biologist called Fabio Bazzaghi studied 2 patches of forest in the Congo Basin, one where there are still forest elephants, and that's a different species from the savanna elephant, fascinating species to study, and one where they've been wiped out decades ago. And what he found was, where their elephants are still there, the above ground biomass, which in today's thinking equals carbon, is about 7% more. So that 7% difference we now know has a market value, because everyone's trying to offset their unavoidable greenhouse gas emissions. And over the course of his or her life, which is maybe 60 odd years, each individual elephant, if you let them live their lives in the forest, is worth 3 million and rising as the price of carbon goes up. That has to be worth something more. So the communities that live in that area, next time a guy comes through with a briefcase full of dollars saying, I need some strong lads to carry ivory, we're going to kill some elephants, they're going to say, get lost, because our elephants are the source of our wealth. And this is what the Rebalance.Earth initiative is about, to use blockchain technology to bring the carbon finance from companies that want to offset their carbon to communities who control whether or not those elephants will survive. And not just survive because they're chained to a tree standing
Yeah.
there. No,
Survive
in their
because-
habitat, doing what
Very good.
elephants do. And that will effectively internalize the cost of conservation into the economy. Because every company, whatever they're selling, whether it's computers or drinks or whatever, if they've offset their carbon emissions, their unavoidable carbon emissions, by investing in nature, then everyone who buys the product is a part of it is going to pay for that. And that's just for one ecosystem service. You know, the Congo Basin forests are huge biotic pumps because of the evaporation and the transpiration of water, which puts water vapor into the atmosphere. And of course, some of it falls back down because it's a rainforest.
Yeah.
But they generate rain as well as receive rain. And those weather systems, you can watch them on animated maps of global weather patterns. They move west across the Atlantic and join the bigger pump of the Amazon basin. And that sends up weather systems to water the Corn Belt in the Midwest and across to Europe. Whether you like your wine from California or from Europe or from Australia or South Africa, New Zealand, you can look at where the weather systems come from. But when you buy a bottle of wine, not a penny of it, the price, goes to protect the biotic pump that effectively waters the vineyards,
to make
or fills the aquifers that provides our drinking water, or powers the hydroelectric schemes. So what's the link between hydroelectricity and elephants and apes in Africa, or orangutans and elephants in Southeast Asia? Well, it's because they're part of that system which keeps us all alive. And that hasn't been recognised in the economy, and it's time it was. As Lord Mayor of the City of London, reassure me that the city is taking this seriously.
So yeah, we are, and we look after Burnham Beaches. Epping Forest is our big forest, and we're doing a huge amount around biodiversity and nature-based solutions up at Epping Forest. We also are the Port Health, so we look after the oyster beds as well up off the Essex coast, and we have come up with our own climate action strategy here in the Square Mile, where we intend to be zero emissions by 2040, which is 10 years ahead of the government. So we take it very seriously. We have a Green Finance Institute here in the city, and an Impact Investing Institute that we've supported. So we actually see this as not only a huge opportunity for the City of London, but a huge opportunity for the world, and how we can influence other markets around the world, but also there are returns to be made as well. So and that's the positive thing.
That is yes, investing in nature protects us in perpetuity if you do it properly.
So as we approach COP15, I mean, you may have a wish list and you may have a reality list, so to speak, but what are you looking for out of COP15?
Well, in the run-up to the Biodiversity
Yeah.
COP15, which China is hosting, and which the face-to-face has been put off again. It should have been last year. You know, last year was supposed to be the super year for nature, where we redefine our relationship with the natural world. And nature bit back in the form of a virus, which has changed our lives. But there is a high-level virtual COP15 happening in October. And what the outcome of that is the post-2020 biodiversity framework, which is supposed to set government policy or guide government policy, and that has to halt biodiversity loss. So we hear politicians have really got the message about climate change. Yeah, we have to prevent dangerous climate change, have to limit it to an average global temperature rise of 1.5 degrees, if we're lucky. We cannot do that without halting biodiversity loss. And sadly, the move towards technological fixes for the climate crisis are likely to result in more damage to nature. I have no objection to technological fixes as long as the true cost of the raw materials and the energy are calculated. Business as usual cannot continue, and you cannot have a vibrant economy if you haven't got a vibrant ecology.
Look, it's been very interesting just talking to you, Ian, and thank you so much for sharing with us your thoughts. But I know there is a gorilla handshake, and maybe we should end with the gorilla handshake, Ian.
Well, it's sort of a handshake. A silverback who I knew as a child, hadn't seen me for years, and came over and sat next to me, breaking all the rules, and engaged in play. You know, he was a young silverback, hadn't got a family, but I picked up his hand to put it back, and just for a moment we were like that.
Right.
And my hand just goes around his thumb. His hand comes halfway down my arm.
I think that's just great. I'm sorry my hand's not as big as the silverback gorilla. It's been a
No,
real joy
real pleasure to
talking
meet
to
you.
you. Thank you, Ian.